Start? All right. Good afternoon. I think we're going to start right now. It's 2:03 and we have slated an hour of time. So we want to make sure that we get to everything. First, we're going to introduce who we are, which you should see on your screen right now. And Keeley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our first webinar. My name is Keeley Nkhabayanye. I am a street vendor, food justice activist, chef, and community leader in East New York, Brooklyn. And I'm from Lesotho, which is a small country surrounded by South Africa. I work as a station agent for New York City Transit Authority. However, my passion is selling on the street, meeting people, and earning extra income, because as an immigrant, we aspire to have extra money to send people back home. So our work, it's not only supporting ourselves as individuals, it's also to send money back home. So it's really important for people to understand that street vendors don't only take care of themselves, they take care of their families, plus their family where they come from. So thank you again for joining this webinar.
Hi, and my name is Julie Torres-Moskowitz. I'm an architect. I have my own architecture practice that focuses on sustainability in Brooklyn. I started working with Street Vendor Project in 2015 to help envision exemplary commissary, and I'm now a Taconic fellow working via the Pratt Center with Street Vendor Project on greening carts across the city. And so I'm excited to be here working on this webinar today with you to help explain some research that was just conducted on women vendors. Thank you.
And we're going to have Sally joining us from Italy, Rome. So I'm really excited. So Sally, thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, we're going to start with our agenda here that I can run through quickly. We wanted to let you know, we know everyone's busy, so we want to let you know what's going to happen in the next hour. We're going to introduce the work of Street Vendor Project, give a brief history of street vending in New York City. Sally's from WECO is going to give a quick global perspective and then join us further for more information at the end of our presentation. We're going to describe how the survey was conducted, give you highlights from the vendor report, which you will have a PDF copy of after this webinar. And we're including video clips from women that were part of the survey. And then at the very end, we'll explain findings from the survey and recommendations. And now, Keeley is going to describe.
Yeah. Well, the title is Vulnerable in Itself. And before we can get into why the title, I just want to introduce Street Vendor Project. It was founded in 2001, and it provides legal services and organizing for 2,300 vendors. And currently we have 5 staff, leadership board of 12 elected annually. And basically, Street Vendor Project help vendors to address their issues on the streets in terms of police, tickets, and just understanding their rights on the street. Basically, vending in New York City, it's tricky because we don't have all the numbers, because not everyone is legal and not everyone has a permit or license, but people are working every day on the streets of New York. There's an estimated number of 20,000 vendors working on the street. There are food vendors, merchant, art, and also we have veterans. Veterans are allowed to sell food, merchandise, and art, they don't have the same issues that we as street vendors have, because the government allows them to have the opportunity to empower themselves by selling on the street. Any veteran who want to apply, they can just go to 42 Broadway and apply for the license to sell. So at least in that regard, that's a positive aspect about New York City vending. And most vendors, they work without licenses, and this is why it's really important that this report was released, because women fall into that category. There's approximately 6,000 people that are working on the street without permits, without licenses. And so it's important to realize majority of those numbers, as we look at them, is women, and they are breadwinners.
So now I just wanted to explain briefly the survey for the women vendors. This is the first of its kind, and the survey was conducted from last fall, November 2018 through March 2019 of this year. There were 50 women that were surveyed. They are all Street Vendor Project members. So just keep in mind that while it's a good sampling of Street Vendor Project members, it does not cover, it may vary slightly from how women vendors in general in the city feel. These members that participated were from 12 countries. They ranged from age 22 to 71. And after they conducted questionnaires, there were supplemental interviews and a focus group. So we're going to play some clips from those interviews later. And two purposes of this study were, one, to share information externally on how government agencies or nonprofits that we could partner with could work with us, or different foundations, and internally to evaluate Street Vendor Project's work and how it could address these very pressing needs of women vendors in particular. So here's a slide that Kile explained the Street Vendor Project and vending in New York City. I'm going to jump to the women vendors in New York City history.
So when it comes to women vending, as we were doing our research, we found out that women have been vending since the late 1900s. And we have an example here of the woman who started vending, and her name is Lillian Harris Dean. I am so inspired by her because she followed the traditional ways that women usually do. She worked as a domestic worker, earned $5, saved that $5 to start her business. She bought a used baby carriage and a steamer using $3, and then the $2 she bought pig feed, which it's a delicacy for people of African descent. Basically, during that time, people were traveling from the South. She's from Mississippi Delta. So there were a lot of African Americans moving from the South to the North. So she is a good example of somebody leaving her neighborhood where she grew up, coming to a new place, looking for a new life. And so she started her business selling food to African Americans who were living in Harlem. And this was her way of earning money as a woman vendor in New York City. I mean, most of us as street vendors, we were not aware that she existed. And to me, she's a good role model because she lived in one section of New York City, which was around 59th Street, and she was working in Harlem. Normally, this is what women do. They live in one neighborhood, go in another neighborhood where they can earn money. So she was able to continue selling. She was lucky in a sense that she met someone and she got married, and the person had a store where they sell newspapers. So she was able to attach her card, and her business was stable because people then knew where to find her. And so she was a success in terms of women vendors because she was able to save money and ended up buying a building on 135th Street, a 5-story building. And then later on, she sold that building, bought another one. When it was time for her to retire, she was considered a success, a real estate owner, and she was able to move from New York to California. So as much as we don't value the contributions of women, I think she's a good example that women contribute to their communities, make an income, support, pay taxes, and we need help to support more women vendors. And Sally will give us a brief perspective on women globally.
Okay, so thanks very much, Keela and Julie, for introducing us to the Street Vendor Project and street vending in New York. So my name is Sally Rover, and I'm the international coordinator of WeGo, which stands for Women in Informal Employment Globalizing and Organizing. And we're a global network that brings together organizations of women who work in the informal economy, so workers' organizations. And we also bring together researchers and statisticians and policy people, all together in the service of trying to bring more visibility to the livelihoods that Keela and Julie have been introducing us to. Also bringing a stronger voice to representative organizations of informal workers, including street vendors, and also Keela just said something very important, which is, we tend not to value the contributions of these workers in the world, and so we try to kind of bring some what we call validity to these occupations. So WeGo is a global network that includes representative workers organizations. One of our members is StreetNet International, which is a global federation of national and local street vending organizations. It organizes, it brings together between 50 and 60 federations of street vendors at national and local level in more than 50 countries around the world. And StreetNet represents street vendors in global policy forums. And then the Street Vendor Project is a member, right, an affiliate of StreetNet International, which represents vendors globally, and StreetNet International is then an affiliate of WeGo, which brings in, again, this other constituency of researchers and statisticians and practitioners. So that's kind of a global perspective on the informal workers movement, and the movement of all workers, especially women who are in occupations that aren't covered by what we consider to be kind of standard employment, labor laws, and social protection, and things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sally. And we're going to include, we're going to ask you a couple of questions at the end of after we explain the research that was done by Street Vendor Project. We'd love your input and perspective. So here we're going to dive in. We're trying to make this research come alive in this webinar. Again, you'll have a PDF of all the research, but this is supplementary to it. So here we wanted to explain, on the left is what you would see primarily in Manhattan. Here's an example of a halal food vendor on the left with a stainless steel cart. And on the right side, we have a woman who's selling mango. She set up her own display, what you'll notice here and with the historic images that women are often working out of baskets or smaller displays, in part because of the heavy, yeah, Kile can speak to this, but the heavy equipment and that are required for the larger carts. So a lot of times women are more mobile and using lighter weight ways to get around the city and sell their products. Here we get into some of the findings from the report, and most women, 82%, sell food. There's different types of vendors. You can sell merchandise, art books, veterans can sell, and then there's food. The majority of women are selling food. Most women, 58%, are selling in the outer boroughs. So the report quantifies how many women are walking from Brooklyn to Queens, maybe an hour commute. And in this image here, again on the left, we see a more traditional or a street vendor cart in stainless steel in Manhattan. And on the right is a lighter weight cart that was creatively put together with grocery cart and metro shelves to sell traditional corn and products to the outer boroughs. Most women, 72%, are selling without permits and licenses. And now Kile will.
Well, again, this idea of women vendors, it's important to realize that Maria is selling, however, she doesn't have a permit. This is a challenging aspect of our work as women vendors because she doesn't have a license, a permit. That means Department of Health, the police, Department of Sanitation, and just the general public in general have a tendency to come and intimidate her. She's a fighter because she understands that she has to support her family, even though she knows that men are strong and they intimidate her. She still come out to work because it's important for her to support her family. So in New York City, we have this problem of lack of permits, and Department of Health and the police are aware that people have to work, but they continue to come to women like Maria and they give them tickets, intimidate them. But as a woman who is a provider, she still have to endure the stress. And this is why it's important for everybody to understand that Maria is a typical woman who's trying to provide for her family. She don't need to be harassed by government officials with tickets and people just trying to buy from her and not pay, you know, threaten her, undermine her, and it's really not right. But she's a fighter and she's still out there working for her family. So I'm so proud of her.
We're gonna play a clip from her, and she's speaking in Spanish, and a translation will come in after her first sentence.
Si trabajo en la factoría somos explotados de los jefes.
Look, if I work in the factories, the bosses exploit us. The ones who pay $13 or even $11 an hour, depending on where you work. And so I would rather been in the streets because we have to take care of our kids. We have to pay our bills. And so if we work in the factories, we can't do that. We can't pay our bills. So I'd rather go out and work in the street and fight to be here.
To highlight Maria and other women, we have, as you can see, the slide is showing that women are providers. And so our role as Street Vendor Project, we want to support these women to continue to to provide for their families. And if they don't work on the streets, who's going to support their children? Who's going to support them? And so it's important that whoever is listening to this report, this webinar, support women vendors in New York City. We need everyone to support women in New York City who are vendors.
We're going to play for you another clip. This is Guadalupe, who's a street vendor, and her daughter.
Well, right now I'm not so sure, but I do plan on opening my own restaurant, mostly for her, because I want to give that a thank you to her for all the hard work she's done for us throughout the years. 6 children, 7 with my niece. It's a lot having to deal with so many children, schools, everything. So it's more like a thank you to her for helping us, for encouraging us to go on and never to give up, even though it's really hard out there, especially for her. Since, like you said, there's a lot of women that don't get the same equality as men. Men is always preferred, pretty much. So yeah, pretty much that's one of the main reasons I'm doing it.
Okay. Next, we're going to go into some of the data from the report. Here is a source of fear for women on the street vendors on the street. I'll just read out loud the quotes. The police, the health department like to intimidate lone women vendors in the street. The thieves and robbers target me and my merchandise because I'm a woman. Being a woman working on the street is vulnerable in itself, which that is the quote from the title of this report. So if we look at this graph here, the source of fear, the top being the most fear, police do a lot of good work, but you can see that in the streets, as a street vendor, police and law enforcement is a source of fear for these street vendors. That's because if they don't have the right licensing or permitting in place, they're constantly shifting around all day long as they try and avoid trouble from the police. Also, because they're women, they stand out, that they would be a target more for the police because there's everyone knows that women vendors have fewer licenses than their male counterparts, so they stand out as a target. Also, robbery and violence on the street is an experience that they're having. Verbal abuse from customers, even harassment from other male vendors is a concern. And so next slide is, we're gonna hear from Ingrid in Brooklyn. Yeah.
Well, Ingrid is another special case. You know, she's 71 years old. She is selling water. Mind you, water you can only sell during the summer. However, she has experienced harassment from the police. They have told her she has to leave because she's not supposed to sell water on the street. She told them, I'm just trying to make some money to support myself, but this is her reality. She leaves and then she comes back the next day to try again, because how else can she make money? I mean, she knows that people are thirsty, they're going in the subway and they have to buy water somewhere. Why not buy from a woman vendor? She's an older woman. She just wants an honest living. And we live in a city that she's constantly being harassed by the police. And we hope that police understand nobody is trying to break the rules. They just want to make an income to support themselves and not to be a burden to anybody else. So we really appreciate women like her who would take their shopping cart and go out and make a little bit of money. Now it's going to be winter. She won't have no opportunity again to sell water. So if she can have a seasonal job that she created herself, you know, it will be great without having to worry about the police and the Department of Health. So we are hopeful that we will come up with some kind of resolution to have permits that are specific for women, because it's not like they need that big cart. They just need something they can handle themselves and make a little bit of money for themselves. So we'll see how she feels.
We're going to play her clip quickly.
Yes, up to last Saturday or last Sunday, the police came. And they say, you have a license? I said, no. I said, but I'm working on it. He said, okay, you're going to back up. You can't send here without a license. And that's about the second or the third time they come after me. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to make $1. And they come and tell me that I don't want them to lock me up. So I just pack up. I say, okay, I'll pack up and leave. And I pack up and leave, but I still come back. Every time they come at me, I come back.
Okay, now we have another lady, Carla. The same thing happens. She's out there selling, working hard, being in the hot summer day. People are happy to buy from her, but some people are not fair. You know, they give women hard time. They want what she's selling, and some of the men, they give her counterfeit money. I mean, how is she supposed to make money if she is out there and they are not giving her the money that she's out there to do? So again, we need enforcement, but we need protection too as women. So Carla is another example of, like, we need to still continue to work with the police and our community to help her, because she has a permit there, but she's still getting harassed. So it's tough.
Here's Carla.
Of course, because when you want respect to the women, people out here don't respect women. They rob us, they hit us, everything. And what? Nothing happens. I'm still here. Women are really abused out here because they know we can't defend ourselves. They insult us. They do everything. But what else are you supposed to do? We have to work.
Okay, and finally, our last clip.
It's Layla. She's working in a busy place, Times Square, but she gets harassed. You know, men come and try to touch her. She's constantly having to tell them, please don't touch me. And so it's ongoing harassment, different types. So she's in a busier place and she gets harassed as well. So we have to work on this harassment.
Sometimes when you're working, you're not paying attention who is behind you, and the man touch you shoulder or head, and for the moment, oh, you're pretty, and then I say, come on, I don't know you, right? Sir, don't touch me. If you need help, let me know. And they just running away. That's most of the times. And I can't say how much times a day or amount, but this is happening all the times. But we can't do nothing. This is, this is kind of annoying, but this is a part of the job when you work in the street.
Okay, so now here we have to move a little faster here, but we wanted to go through the sources of stress, which I think they were shown clearly in the video clips. But it's interesting to see the top here. I mean, this just shows you how women are business people in the city, and so slow business, which is tied to the bottom component on bad weather, is really important to them. They are not earning an hourly wage. They are making a living based on sales. And so it's really important that each day that they're out there, that there are people purchasing items from them. That is their top source of stress. Second, we have tickets and arrests. So that ties into what we were speaking about earlier about whether it's police, Department of Sanitation, Department of Health, concerns about immigration status or other things combined with those tickets. But that's their second largest source of stress. Then there's personal or family illness. As we mentioned, these women are primary breadwinners for responsible for, you know, upwards of 4, 5, 6 other people, children or parents that they're taking care of. Lack their own permit is a big concern. There's nothing we can do about that until we'll speak about the Intro 116 bill that might pass, which would be the first time a bill passes since 1983, allowing for some more permits in New York City. And then there's work-home balance that women experience, and expenses, paying the rent and bills. So next slide, we have access to services is something that these women need. 42% of the women surveyed do not have health insurance. 36% do not have bank accounts. 72% said they were not able to save for retirement. So they have a big need for training and social services that Street Vendor Project could help provide and connect them to other agencies. This is the slide that shows, as we're looking internally at ourselves, how can Street Vendor Project provide more pointed help for women street vendors in particular. And it's interesting to note that market opportunities is way high up on their list, majority of the respondents. So that would be taking part in street fairs, other kinds of pop-up markets where they could have a temporary permit that's easier to gain than the street vendor permit, which is an underground market for that. And they're not in those networks where they can find the underground permit or can afford it, because it's upwards of $25,000 for an underground permit. Whereas if there were more permits from the city, it would be $200. So then we have social and financial services as an interest of theirs. They'd like to learn more about that. That goes hand in hand with trainings too. Although you see the training topics, they'd like to know English for vendors that would help them, and leadership skills. We also see that they're interested in job linking with other vendors, so networking with other business people, and cooperatives. A lot of the women already work cooperatively, cooking together. So this seems like an area where that's unique to, maybe a little more unique to women, that they are interested in cooperatively working together. They're also interested in discussion groups, getting to know one another and create a community that includes recreation, relaxation trips. And then savings groups. Could there, as we saw, they don't have bank accounts. Could there be collective work together to help learn how to save and plan for retirement? And now we're going to move, Keely is going to take us through the recommendations of the report.
Basically, we feel that police are there to protect us. And so maybe we need to have improved training and communication, and understand what is protection versus enforcement. Because it's not like we don't want the police out there. We want the police to protect us when we are in neighborhoods that may not be safe and we are alone. So it would be great if we can have a better communication whereby everybody understand the law and understand the needs of women.
We also recommend, as I mentioned earlier, there's a bill right now. I think it has a majority of city council, but it hasn't come to a vote yet, for expanded vendor permits. Intro 1116 would create 4,000 new vending permits over 10 years. And just to quickly go into the case study of Los Angeles, in 2016, I think it was 2016 or early 2017, Los Angeles decriminalized street vending citations, and in MacArthur Park and Westlake, which was very helpful to immigrant vendors that might otherwise be in trouble with their visa status if they were fined as a street vendor. So they decriminalized those, and then they went ahead and last year Los Angeles lifted the cap completely. There's no limits. Anyone can have can apply for a permit or license to sell in the street. So that's a good example of Los Angeles. New York competes against Los Angeles, but here in New York, since 1983, when there were 3,000 permits, it has not changed since 1983. There's been this introduced again that would over 10 years allow 4,000 new permits. Along with that comes enforcement and an advisory board studying street vendors to make sure that everything's done properly and fair to brick and mortar stores and other constituents in the city. But it would be great in kind of an outcome of this women vendors. I would love to see if there was heavy recruiting to have women vendors, if this bill does pass, to allow women to be on that list of who can be a new vendor. I think that's important to give them opportunities, just like they speak of, even in my construction industry as an architect, that you can't, you're not on the golf course with the guys doing business. So similarly, street vendors, women are often not part of that underground market that has the permits, or even knowing when and where to sign up for wait lists for new permits. So I think it's important to have city outreach and agency outreach to reach women vendors. And here's a clip from Adriana in Queens about permits.
El único mensaje es que pues yo creo que nosotros también merecemos apoyo porque no estamos robando, no estamos ganando,
Because we're not robbing anyone.
no estamos
We're not doing anything bad.
pidiendo
We're earning our daily bread.
al gobierno como muchas
We're not asking for any help from the government. We are
aportamos
contributing and earning
y
our
generamos
income.
ingresos.
All I'd ask
Yo
for
pediría para
all the
todas
women
las mujeres que también
is to give us an opportunity to give a permit to men
para trabajar
because we pay taxes,
porque también podemos estar,
so we also have rights.
también tenemos derechos.
Since this is an internal assessment for Street Vendor Project, we are hopeful that Street Vendor Project will be in a position to increase opportunities for women to vend, and also help other women in the outer boroughs and create like a clearinghouse for all vendors, and also develop models like cooperatives which work other parts of the world. And this is exciting, and Sally will give us the last assessment of this report and give us a global perspective. Thank you, Sally.
Yeah, so we're at the end of our presentation, but we wanted Sally, if you could join us again and maybe give us some examples of case studies around the world that we should look into, direction New York City could move in a positive way for women vendors. We'll also be taking questions if we can figure it out. Oh, no, if anyone wants to ask any questions, we can queue them up. Oh, hello. Oh, we see a hand raised, but Sally, are you able to hear us now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so if you want to—
Connection restored.
Okay, okay, good. If you want to, it'd be great if you were answering our first question to you, which is just about, we're hoping for some optimistic examples of where this has worked for women vendors around the world.
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, just to say how important this study is, because I think it brings visibility to some conditions of women street vendors that are probably go against expectations. So, for example, people often assume that particularly women street vendors are, just doing a little bit of street vending kind of on the side for extra income. But your study shows that, more than half of the vendors in your sample are primary breadwinners, and many of them are the only income earners in households. So it's a really important to be able to get these findings kind of out into the discussion, to be able to create better policies. And I think, another kind of thing to point to with your study is that there are helpful examples from all different places in the world where just what you're suggesting in terms of working together with local authorities has worked very well. So where there are representative organizations of street vendors that can help the local authorities understand some of the conditions that street vendors are working in, they are able to work together towards coming up with things like a licensing or permitting system that that makes sense, that helps everyone. So it's another kind of myth is that local authorities have, is that if you expand access to permits, then all kinds of problems are going to be created. And what your study is pointing to is actually there are all kinds of problems created by having such a severe limit on permits, right? And actually the international examples that we have out there can show that expanding access to permits actually helps with some of those other problems. So so between the work that you've done at the Street Vendor Project to kind of just make these conditions more visible, and some of the interesting examples from the international space, it's clear that there are ways to bring together organizations of vendors and local authorities to find things that work.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open, hopefully I won't delete the webinar. I'm going to open the Q&A, and if you could hang on, Sally, maybe there's a question for you too. I see someone's hand is raised, but sure. It looks like we don't have questions actually, unless, oops. I thought there were questions. I saw someone's hand raised, but it might be our fault. Oops.
Is there anyone who have a question?
Yeah, you could write either on chat or, oh, okay, here's some questions. Okay. Okay, we have a question for you, Sally. Chelsea is writing in, and she's from Transportation Alternatives. Okay, she says, thank you so much for joining us to raise awareness about pedestrian traffic safety on Canal Street, working with SVP this summer. My question for Sally is, in comparative studies, where do the vendors go? We're working on allocating street space to pedestrians. I don't know if you have some examples, Sally, of that's an ongoing issue in our city with Department of Transportation. There's so many things that need to fit into the space of the sidewalk.
Right. Yeah, so I can just give two examples, I suppose. So the challenge is this: the street vendors are where they are for a reason, right? So they're vending in a particular place because there are customers, because they can get their goods there. There are all kinds of reasons why street vendors sell where they do. And so the instinct to move them to another place oftentimes doesn't work, because whatever place they're moved to doesn't work because there are no customers, or they can't get their goods there, or whatever. So the successful examples are the ones where vendors have worked together with the authorities on designing a space that can allow all the different users of public space to each have a way of fitting in. So one example is in Ahmedabad in India. There's an organization of women street vendors called the Self-Employed Women's Association that worked with the city to design a space under a highway overpass where the women could be protected from sun and rain and, you know, the weather conditions, but that was also right by a wholesale market so they could get their goods there easily. That's also a place where pedestrians can pass by. So it's thinking together about what can work for everyone that works in that example. And then there's another one in Durban, South Africa, a place called Warwick Junction, where again there was discussion of, it's sort of right by a transportation hub where there's a taxi rank and bus station. So all these transportation modes come together. So again, if it gets too crowded, the instinct is, well, let's move vendors somewhere else. But that then would take away all the services that vendors provide to the commuters who are passing through the junction. So they found a way to work with, you know, architects and representatives of vendor organizations to try to come up with a way to design a market that would allow space for pedestrians, allow, you know, commuters to get where they're going, but also give the street vendors a kind of space that they need.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like we have a lot of those types of spaces, underpasses, and in fact, I think I'm allowed to mention there's Senator Jessica Ramos in Queens. There's a potential space at a heavily used MTA station where there's talks of maybe letting vendors into those spaces that are protected from weather too. So seeing that happen and seeing more, as you described, more opportunities for spaces that are, I guess, still allowing vendors to have access to the necessary foot traffic that they need, but to be allocated into an area where they can be out of the way at a certain corner, busy corner, perhaps. So let's see, we're looking through chat and also through Q&A, and there is, Ingrid was asking if there are what are some of the ways of having unlimited licenses can prevent corruption or other problems that vendors face? She's from Corona, Queens.
I mean, I can answer that one. It's the same example as in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
If the city give permits, everybody can work together. And I don't understand why they're having a hard time. And I mean, people can organize themselves, and because people want to work legally, that's the point. And so we are waiting for city council to respond.
Mm-hmm.
We invited people from Los Angeles to share their experiences, and so I'm hopeful that city council will listen to other states, other countries. I mean, I was in Portugal. I saw a lot of people selling in different places, and Rome as well. And so I don't understand what is the hardship in New York City. So
I would say too that I mean, I'm an advocate for the bill to pass this lift the cap bill. When I see, I'm not sure if the slides still show, but I have a few. I don't know if, Sally, can you see the slides still? Or no?
No, I'm seeing you too.
Oh, okay. So we do have, maybe, I don't want to mess it up. Maybe I won't show, but we have a slide that shows, you know, the market for mobile vending in 2019 will reach 2.7 billion in revenue this year. And it's an example. These are real businesses, and when there's, I would think government, you know, they want to create small businesses. That's the whole approach to helping the city grow. I have a small business myself, so I can relate to this. But you want to encourage business, not have an underground market that's $25,000 to have access to a permit that should be $200. To me, that's pointing to a problem that we all need to work together to resolve. And I don't know if Sally, if you wanted to add anything from your experience with other countries.
Well, yeah, just to add that, you know, the challenge is to separate the availability of permits from whatever regulations you need to make vendor vending work in your city, right? So oftentimes the justification for limiting the number of permits is an assumption that if you issue more permits, suddenly everyone with a permit will sort of be able to do whatever they want, or sell wherever or whenever, or that there will be no control, no means of control, right? So putting a cap on the permit is argued to be the way to maintain control. But actually, you can, if you separate those out, you can increase the number of permits available to help address the corruption that does exist, because when there's a huge secondary kind of black market, to free up access. But you can also still regulate street vending in a variety of ways, so you don't create all the problems that that local authorities kind of worry about. So you can still have certain types of rules or restrictions or whatever, working together with whatever vendors organization is there to work through all the details. So I think it's letting go of the idea that the number of permits available is the only way to sort of regulate public space and make things work.
Okay, great, thank you. I think, I'm gonna cough. Sorry. Okay, we have one other question here, and we're towards the end of our time. Someone was asking, who's on, Oscar, asking about the balance when we mentioned in our study that women wanted more relaxation and time for community, the balance between work and home.
What is the question?
Sorry about that. Are there ideas for that? I mean, I would just add quickly, I had an extra slide, but when we were studying with Street Vendor Project, exemplary commissaries, because all the street vendors with carts, they need to be in a commissary. There's 104 of them across the city. We were looking at creating healthy, productive work environments, because half their time would be spent in the commissary, half is on the street, and how you can improve those conditions within the commissary to help address and create a better work environment. The other portion that I mentioned in the beginning, I'm as a Taconic Fellowship working with Street Vendor Project now, trying to green carts. We're trying to create a better environment for street vendors and for people that are going to street carts, right? So is there composting or to-go packaging that's better? Is there healthier filtration for charbroiling meats? Different ways that street vendors can create healthier life on the street for pedestrians passing by, but also for themselves, because they're there working all day long. So we're working towards that goal, I think, within Street Vendor Project. And I think that's it for questions. I was looking here. Saw if there any research. Yeah. If we wanted to make sure you know that you can always speak to us by email. We can further answer anyone's questions. We're going to follow up with this webinar with sending you the PDF of the women's report. And I wanted, oh, maybe she can't drop in, but there's a new Deputy Director of Street Vendor Project, Karina, if she's listening, she might pop her head through. But there's a new Deputy Director, a woman who's cares very much about this women's vendor report and the women committee that is a subcommittee of Street Vendor Project. So there's ample opportunity to get in touch with Street Vendor Project about this. And I guess, Kile, did you
I just want to thank you, Sally, for joining us from Rome.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for their questions. This is our first report, our first webinar. So we are excited that you joined us, and we need your support. And I want to thank the team at Street Vendor Project for allowing us to have an opportunity to share the stories of women who are working hard every day. And we look forward to more work and more opportunities to share knowledge and data throughout the world, because women throughout the world are working in informal economies, and we can learn from them and they can learn from us, and our governments and other community-based organizations, they can learn from the experiences of women. And so I thank everyone who's participating in this webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And there's further research needed, as very clear when you read through the report, that we hope this leads to more research and improvements for women vendors. Thank you.
Thank you, Keila. Thank you, Julie.
All right, thank you.
And thanks to everyone who joined us. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Ooh.